Tune into this week's Xamarin Show where I have my good friend Aaron back on from Syncfusion to talk about the amazing iOS controls, charts, and graphs that integrate into your application. So tune in. Welcome back, everyone, to the Xamarin Show. I'm your host, James Montemagno, and today I have my good friend Aaron back from Syncfusion. How's it going, Aaron?
Hey, doing pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. We had you on recently to talk about how Syncfusion makes awesome, ridiculous controls for Xamarin Forms. However, you wanted to come back and talk a little bit about the native side of things with a traditional approach on Xamarin.iOS and Android.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I have a very similar app to what I showed you before. Same concept. I just did switch it up a little bit, use one different control, but it's going to be this time the Kanban and the diagram control.
Cool.
For those who watched the previous video, I showed a kind of prototype app for controlling a robot toy. So I'll show that again, just slightly different for Xamarin.iOS.
Yeah. So people that maybe are brand new to Syncfusion, maybe never heard of Syncfusion before, can you give them kind of the 101 overview of what Syncfusion is?
So Syncfusion is a now 17-year-old company that's been building controls for .NET for for various different platforms. So we support web, we support desktop, we support mobile. And so the general gist is that we provide a toolkit to simplify development.
Yeah, any kind of type of control that you can possibly imagine.
Exactly.
Often I'm always thinking about like the bar charts and graphs and crazy things. It seems like that was the bread and butter, if you will, of bread or margarine, bread and margarine of the entire Syncfusion. But really, even in the last video, we showed this kind of really optimized list view and this really cool diagram chart. So there's all sorts of stuff.
Absolutely.
You can,
Yeah, so most people do think of those kind of controls maybe when they think of like a third-party control vendor, grids, charts, and things like that, but there's a lot more. So we have document viewers, we have PDF viewer, we have document editor, we have the Kanban control, you have drag and drop support for things like that, we have Gantt controls, we have radial menus, we have buttons, we have gauges, we have everything in between as well as all those kind of old school, boring, line of business type controls.
The stuff that you need, because who doesn't like charts and graphs and awesome stuff inside their application? That's what you need.
Yes.
Every application can use a little bit more bar chart in their lives. That's what I like to say. So cool, awesome. I've been using Syncfusion for over a decade, like I mentioned on the previous video, which I'll put in the show notes below, so make sure you check out that video for the Xamarin Forms goodness. But I'm really excited to have you on because I've been doing a lot of the Xamarin Forms stuff, and you wanted to show iOS specifically, developers maybe just building native Xamarin iOS applications, what Syncfusion has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the reasons we want to show this, because this also kind of plays into what's unique about Syncfusion, is that we want to make things really simple. We want there to be a consistent look and feel in terms of our own controls, but also what our customers are able to do. So if one of our customers wants to build an application across multiple platforms, they probably want it to be fairly consistent in terms of look and feel. And so really what I'm showing today, like I said, since it's going to be very similar to the last demonstration, it's just to kind of bring that home, kind of show you that, you can create the same thing regardless of which approach you take.
Got it.
All right. So real quick, so this is the Syncfusion website. One of the things that I also want to talk about is everything that I'm going to show today is available for free in one of two different ways. So there is, as you can see right here on the homepage, a free trial link.
Big button, free trial, get it.
So that gives you access to everything. So that's over 800 controls for all platforms, including Xamarin, Xamarin Forms, Xamarin.iOS, and Xamarin Android. And then there's also our community license. So we also do support indie developers and students and things like that with our community license. That gives you access to everything we offer, so all of those controls for free, as long as you are a company that makes $1 million or less in revenue per year, or are 5 developers or less as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and then over that, then there's pricing tier for anything you need.
Yes, absolutely. Cool. All right, so let's talk, before we get into the code, let's talk about how do we get access to everything.
Yeah, how do you get started?
So here we have our documentation page, so you can find this by going to help.syncfusion.com, or from our main site, you can just go to Learning and Support, and it's under Documentation. And so from here, you just need to find the platform that you're working with. Okay. So in this case, we're dealing with Xamarin.iOS is what I'm going to be focusing on, since we don't have all the time in the world to go over everything on the Android side as well, since it's mostly the same. That's, again, the idea here. It's basically the same regardless of which approach you take. So when you get into this, the first thing you want to do is figure out how to get access to our Xamarin controls. So there's a couple different ways. You can download the assemblies directly to your machine. Okay. So you can download directly to your Mac, for example. And that would be the same thing that you would get if you were doing our free trial, for example. You'd be downloading them to your machine. Or you can just get the NuGet packages. So we do have a NuGet feed, so you can do it this way. It's just up to you and your specific approach.
That makes it nice and easy to get the updates automatically.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yep. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the actual app. So first I'm going to show the kind of the getting started here for the first control that we're going to be looking at, and then I'm actually going to show you the app so you can kind of visualize it, and then we'll move from there. So for all of the controls in our documentation, you'll always have a getting started page. So you have this list of everything that's available in the platform, then you click on that control, and then you get this getting started page.
It's nice. You go and you see the control that you want to get, and then go right to this doc, learn how to load it, learn how to use it.
Absolutely.
Very, very beautiful documentation.
Yes, thank you. So there's a lot of pictures as well, a lot of screenshots. Yeah. And so the first thing you want to make sure you do is read it. You know, you always got to read documentation, or otherwise it's not very useful.
Yeah.
And if you read it, it'll tell you things like what you need to do for additional steps in order to get a control to be to actually work or to come up. Sometimes there are additional steps. So you just want to make sure you read the documentation and make sure you catch all that. Another thing that's important here is also there's sometimes an overview of the control, so sometimes there are some concepts that need to be explained, and we'll get into that later. But just basically, this is what you need to start with for the first control which we're going to be looking at, which is the Kanban. Just a few simple lines of code is all that's needed to get that up and running.
Yeah, I always, is it Kanban, Kanban?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll just
tabs,
say either way.
spaces.
Yeah, I'll just alternate between the two.
There we go. That's what I like to do.
Yeah, cover my bases.
A lot of podcasts that I record, I like to say that. We're the podcast that don't know how to pronounce anything correctly at all. So very cool. So we can. Yeah. So what is a Kanban board? Maybe at a high level, since you're going to be using it, I guess. Like, why would someone want to use this specific control?
Yeah. So at a high level, it's essentially a very interactive way of organizing data. Okay. So it's a very visual and very like I said, interactive way of visualizing things. So you essentially have these cards on a grid, and this grid is mainly comprised of columns. And these cards you can drag from one column to another, and using that kind of interaction, you can create workflows. You can assign things to other resources. So you can assign tasks to people or tasks to departments. You know, however you want to configure that. So yeah, so that's what we're going to be using to, in this case, give commands or actually set up a mission structure for our robot toy, which will then be given some commands based off of that.
Perfect.
So speaking of, let's go ahead and take a look at that. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and run the application.
Perfect. So we have Visual Studio for Mac here, and then our iOS simulator.
Yep, here's our iOS simulator. So this is the Kanban control, or the Kanban control. And so you can see here, this is, you do have the ability to scroll left and right depending on how many columns you have. There's no limit on how many columns you can create. In this case, I just have 2. You can see up here I have available missions and accepted missions. And again, for anyone who saw this, the previous demonstration is it's the same exact concept. The only thing is that the interaction here is kind of reversed. So before you had to choose, you got all the missions set for you automatically. You had to get rid of the ones you didn't want. Here, you have to move the ones that you want into position in order to choose or to build out your mission scenario here. And so this is the essentially the basic interaction you get with the Kanban. You have these cards, and you can move things around.
And is all the reordering just magically, I mean, what's kind of the flow of I add some cards, and then magically things happen?
There is some magic, but there is actually some configuration that has to be done with the Kanban control.
Okay, and we'll look at the code.
And we'll look into that, yes.
Okay.
So essentially, once you choose your missions in this app, what happens is you click Accept at the bottom, and then it builds out a diagram builder.
Oh, cool. So these are the ones that we put only in an accepted column. These are the things that I want the little toy robot to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so then the idea from here is that now you've built out your scenario, and so you could then get to create using a flow chart, you get to essentially give the little robot its commands. So you can imagine this being, move 10 feet this way, or,
take
target
a right,
this.
take a left, target this,
Yeah, shoot this missile here, whatever you want it to be. And so once we get to this point, there's a bit more configuration that goes on here because there's a lot of objects on the screen. Each one of them is configurable. Yeah. So we'll get into that. All right, and so that's the app in a nutshell. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this was done.
Sure.
So the way I chose to do this, I actually didn't really use the iOS designer much at all. The only thing that I used that for, so if we look at my storyboard, the only thing I used that for was essentially to link up my segues between views. So when so I had to set up a navigation controller to kind of be the root view, and then from there I kind of connected everything else. But beyond that, as you can see here, just 3 simple views, really 2. That's all. That's the only thing that was used. So everything
building
else is
your
in the code.
own diagram inside of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So everything else is done in the code. So
cool.
we're going to start by looking at the main view controller, as I've named it here. And so what we've got is a couple of fields that were created. So we've got 2 observable collections to hold the initial set of data, so the initial set of missions, and then the ones that we are ultimately accepting and passing over to our diagram.
Perfect. So you're using an observable collection for a specific reason instead of a list? That way it kind of like updates when you get notifications?
Part of the reason was because this is also copy and pasted from the previous project, which was also kind of the idea of showing this. Reusable code is something that everyone loves. So this was really just a way of showing that if you needed to support more than one platform or more than one approach, it's easy to do if you've already built it one way.
Yeah, because here, mission type and view models, if we look at your code structure, actually it seems like that's in a .NET Standard library, right? You still have Android in here.
Yes.
But even though we're showing iOS, but you have view models and you can reuse some code there.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, very cool.
But yeah, to your point, yeah, these probably could have just been lists.
Very cool.
So when moving on from there, we create our Kanban control. So just in this case, 1 line. So we create a new instance of that, and then we start to configure it onto the view. So the first thing that I did was I calculated the size of the view bounds, and then I did some basic math here. So I subtracted 40. I don't know what units those are, pixels I'll say.
Yeah.
And then that way to give myself room for the button at the bottom.
Perfect.
And so based on that, we also calculate where the position of the button should be. So it should be at the bottom of that view bound, and then put it there. So that's essentially what's going on here. So you can see some of the math that's going on to create the
button on the bottom.
Yeah, the Kanban button and the button. So from there, we actually get to set up the Kanban control.
Got it, okay.
So
the important stuff.
Yeah, the important stuff. So we give the Kanban an item source. So it has that initial set of data for the first cards that are set up. And then we get to set up the columns that are inside of the Kanban control. And so the first thing you need to do is to tell the Kanban control which field from your data is going to be the column mapping path. So where is it going to figure out where these cards go?
Okay.
So in this case, we have a field called category, so we mapped it to that. And so you'll see that down here in these several lines of code, we've actually created manually the columns themselves. So I've manually created an available missions column, and then I've manually created an accepted missions column.
Got it.
But if you look at what I've commented out here, we can also let the Kanban control do it on its own.
Oh, cool.
So it can look at your item source, it can look at your data, figure out what all the different options are, and just automatically create those columns for you.
Very cool.
So yeah, it's up to you depending on how your data is structured. And so then really the last thing that's in here is handling what happens when you drag and drop. And so there's really only one event that I'm handling in this case, and that's drag in, so what happens when you actually drop. And so there's a couple different scenarios here. So what happens if you drag within the same column? We are just moving, changing the index value of that item within that same column.
Got it.
And then for the other 2 scenarios here is what happens if you move from one column to the other and then back and forth. So we add, or we remove, or we just change index values.
So you have a source, which is where it started, and then target where it ends, and you figure out what you want to do.
So you can grab your source column variable, so you can get the title, you can get the index value, and so you can do a lot with those values.
Very cool.
Yep, and that's pretty much it.
That's it. So, like really not that much code.
Yeah, so that's all you need.
That's it. That's the whole code for the whole thing.
Yeah, so that's the entire Kanban control.
Crazy.
Nothing else is needed, and then what we saw in the simulator, let me bring that up again, is rendered just from those little bits of code. And
do you get a bunch of things for free here? Because I don't see any code for like this items count, or I don't see like there's this little
all of that is
arrow
just part
thing.
of it.
What are these arrow things?
These are what allow you to collapse the columns. So that, yep, you do get all that for free. It is customizable, so there is a template you can access to change that, but it just comes with it. So there's no additional setup for any of that.
How does it know what to render inside this little card?
Yes, so inside of the card itself is also a template that's pretty much set up for you. And one of the things that I did to get them to look the way they do is if we go into my model here in the shared solution, I have a mission type model. And this was carried over from the previous project. And what I did was I had it inherit from Kanban model.
Oh, cool.
So the Kanban control does have a a model defined within it that gives you some basic fields, and they are already mapped to those card widgets.
Well, cool. So you don't even have to worry about building that stuff. It just does it for
you don't have to do any kind of binding or anything like that. You just set up the fields, and you're good to go.
Yeah,
and it supports a lot. So it gives you support for the title, description, tags, images, all that's built in.
Very cool.
Yep. And so from there, we get to move on to our diagram control. And so there is a button here, and that button is essentially moving us over to diagram control.
Got it. Makes sense.
And so once we get to the diagram view, then this actually was literally copy and pasted from the previous project.
Because that one we did in code behind. So
yes.
So when I'm thinking of Syncfusion, if I'm developing Xamarin.forms app or Xamarin.iOS app, really there's the designer views, there's the code behind views,
yes.
and there's the XAML views. And it seems as if the code behind views are the same names and same property names. Is that correct, or is it very similar?
They are exactly the same. So there are very, very few tweaks that had to be made here. I think I changed maybe the names of some of the collections, and maybe I had to add a this here and there.
And add it to the iOS view instead of the Xamarin.forms view. Very cool.
Yep. And so for those who haven't seen that, what's happening here is we are, again, creating an instance of the diagram control. We're setting up its view bounds. And then we are handling a couple of events. So we have a node clicked and a user node clicked. So this is where we get into what I mentioned before with the kind of the concepts of different objects in some of these controls. So if we go into the diagram control, getting started, there is a section here called Basic Building Blocks of a Diagram.
Got it, to learn a little bit about what you're doing.
Right, so the view is comprised of the diagram, and inside the diagram we have nodes, which are the shapes that you interact with. Between nodes are connectors, and those are configurable. There are different styles you can choose from.
Cool.
On a node are multiple ports that you can create, and each port allows you to connect multiple connectors to a single node. So you can have one on the side, on the top, on the corners, wherever you want them.
Yeah.
And then annotations are the blocks of text that go inside of nodes.
Got it.
And so all these things you need to kind of account for when you're creating a diagram, because it will change how you represent data, but depending on how you set these up.
Cool.
And so what we're doing in the code here is essentially handling the creation of each of those. So when we bring in our initial set of data, we're going through and we're picking out each item and creating a node out of it. So nodes are very similar to the cards in a Kanban in that they're kind of preset. There's already a default template there that you don't have to bind anything.
I see I have a shape type of ellipses, so I could have a rectangle or different size. Yeah.
Yep, and you can even draw your own shape. So if you wanted to create a new graphics item and just draw it out, you can do that and set that as your shape. Cool. We can also create new annotation. So when you create a new node, you get to add a default set of text that you can put in there. And one thing I didn't show you was that when you do that, by default, it is editable. So if a user double clicks on an annotation, they get a, there you go.
Well, pop-up so you can edit it right away.
Yep, you can change the text and do that. So one of the things that you can also do when you create a node is, of course, control that. So you can set it up so that users cannot resize, rotate, or edit what's inside of the nodes.
Yeah, they're in control.
Yes. So once we create the nodes, then we're also handling the creation of new nodes after the initial ones based off of that initial data set.
Yeah, every time you hit that plus button.
Right, so every time we hit that plus button. And so that also gets us into, so this is where we create that. So this is handling adding new nodes, which are a different size, and we also calculate the offset so that they're not created right on top of each other. So we have to figure out where the original one is and then move our controls off to the side a bit. And then here you can see we've chosen a different shape for them as well. In addition to the shapes, one of the things I didn't do was do anything with colors, but you can also select different colors or create the nodes with different colors. So you can randomize that, you can assign it to different node types, however you want to do it. And then what we're doing after that, or in between that, is when we're also creating the new nodes, we're also going ahead and creating connectors between them. So whenever we create these nodes, we want to make sure that they're connected to the previous node that it was created from.
Source and target, very similar to the Kanban board, kind of like where things are moving around.
Absolutely. So very simple to handle that, pretty easy to understand there. You also, since we are creating the connectors here, you can see how we can customize them. We have, we can change the width of the stroke, we can change the brush type, so the color. We can change the type of segment, so it can be the step line, it can be a curved line, it can be dotted line as well.
Got it.
And then down here we have our different actions that are that happen when we click on those plus and minus buttons. So we have a delete node and we have an add node button. And then that brings us to the handles themselves. So those little plus and minus buttons, those are user handles. And just like with ports, you can have them on all corners and all sides of the node. So you can have up to 7 applied to a node. And here I'm just using 2. You can see here we simply create in this case I'm just creating 2 button images. So an image for the plus sign and an image from the minus sign. Cool. And so what we do is when we add the user handle, we give it a name, we select a position relative to the node, and then we pass through that image.
Nice.
And that's it.
That's it. Yeah, not too bad at all. Again, like almost just like about 100 lines of code, but the entire thing is done for you, and you don't have to worry about the dragging and dropping. You just handle what you want to happen at that point.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Very
nice.
And one thing that was mentioned in the previous session as well is with the diagram control, it's not just a free-form flow diagram editor. It does support automatic layout. So if you want to create an organizational chart, for example, if you want to do something hierarchical, you can give it a data set and just have it figure it out.
Done.
And do it. So you just got to set your parent-child relationships, and that's it. So you can do mind maps, you can do org charts, you can do flow charts as well automatically, and you can pick and choose which nodes the users can edit.
Oh,
so you can have an automatic layout, but the users can still edit different parts of it.
Nice. Now, those are just 2 of the controls really that we show, but can you see them all on the website or something like that too? Like
yes.
When you go to
Yes, we can.
Kind of see what else, because I can imagine this application I might want to have some charts or graphs of like, was it success or what was a failure, things like that, right? So
yeah, so on the website, as we mentioned, in addition to the free trials, you can also just look at demos of all the products. So there's a view demo section here that lets you see the controls for all of our platforms. So mostly the web is visible on the website, but when we get to mobile and desktop, we have some sample apps. So for Xamarin, we have a Google Play or an Android application
on Google Play.
Yeah, on Google Play, and an iOS application on the App Store. So you can download that, and that gives you access to all the controls that we currently have for Xamarin. And you'll be able to see them for Xamarin.forms, iOS, and Android. And you will get to see all the features laid out in very nicely designed examples. So my example here wasn't designed. I didn't design anything.
It looks pretty good. I mean, it's just those. Actually, what you did is you just use what was built in, and it actually looks pretty great. I mean, imagine if you were building a Kanban board by yourself, right?
Right,
It takes so much time and energy just to
so
imagine how could I do that, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's great about it is that you can create something like that without really putting too much effort into it. If you did put effort into it, our sample browser shows you what it can look like. So you can add more animations, you can add more, more images and things like that.
Very cool.
And so yeah, so if you visit our site, click on these links, or just go to the App Store so you can download that.
Very cool. Anything else you wanted to show off really quick, or you think you got it all?
I think I got it all.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Aaron, this has been awesome. I love kind of seeing the worlds of how we can, no matter what type of application we're building, whether it's Xamarin Forms, Xamarin Native, or UWP and web, you can kind of share these great controls everywhere.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Thanks for coming on, showing it off.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Check out Syncfusion at syncfusion.com. We'll have all of the links in the show notes below. And thanks again, of course, for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe, where you can get notifications each and every episode. So make sure you hit that subscribe button over there, down over there, ding that bell, and become part of the notification squad so you get updated every time a new episode is released. So until next time, I'm James Montemagno, and this has been The Xamarin Show.